Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be discussing aperture, depth of field, how they're related to each other, and why it's important that you understand what these things are. So let's get right into it. Now, aperture is one of the main elements of the exposure triangle. So understanding these concepts are going to make you a better overall photographer and put you on your way to actually using manual mode. Now, the reason it's important that you at least have the ability to use manual mode is because that gives you the ultimate creative control over your images. You need to understand aperture, shutter speed, and ISO, so that way you can shape your images, because those are the three things that the tool that we use, the camera, is really designed to shape the light that comes in, and we can create what type of creative images that we want to. So as you start to understand these basic concepts, you're going to become a better and better overall photographer. So although this stuff can be kind of techie and kind of boring, it's very, very important that you start to conceptualize these things. So the first thing that I always tell people when it comes to aperture is to think about the aperture like it's the pupil of your eye. Aperture blades inside your lens, they stop down to create a smaller hole and let less light in, or they open up wide to let more light in. Very similar to the way the pupil works in your eye. So f16, or a higher f-stop number, represents a smaller hole on the inside of your lens, where something like f4, or a lower number, represents a wider aperture or a wider hole on the inside of your lens. Now, a wider hole will allow more light to hit the sensor, versus a smaller hole will allow less light to hit the sensor and affect how much ISO value you need to use to get accurate exposure. The other thing that aperture really affects is the depth of field. Now right now I'm shooting at f16, and that's creating a really deep depth of field. You'll notice that the trees are in focus, and so am I. Now if I go to f4, which is the widest aperture that I can do, the ISO value will drop, giving me cleaner images, but also you'll notice that the depth of field is much more shallow. Now the trees in the background are out of focus, and that's what's known as a shallow depth of field. Less of my image is in sharp focus. Now f4 is considered the widest aperture that this lens can shoot at, so I'm shooting at f4, which allows me to have the lowest ISO values while also creating the shallowest depth of field. Now if I go back to f16 like I was before, I'm now having to use a higher ISO value. I'm now shooting at ISO 2000, but we're now at f16, and you notice that the trees are again in focus again. So again, let me show you here again. If we go to f4, you'll see that the background becomes blurry. And if we go to f16, you'll see that the background becomes in focus again. So that's an example of shallow or deep depths of field. Again, f16 is a stopped down aperture, allowing less light in, but giving me a deeper depth of field. Where f4, if I go to that again for you, is now letting more light in, but creating a shallower depth of field. So those are the basic things that aperture control when it comes to your image. Now, understanding aperture and depth of field is very important because it's allowing you to really control the look that you're going to get out of your image. Now, let's say I'm shooting something like a landscape shot, and I want to have a really deep depth of field so that everything I'm shooting is in nice sharp focus. Well, understanding how your aperture works means that you're going to be able to actually achieve what your goal is. If you want to have a really deep depth of field, now you're going to understand, okay, I want that higher f-stop number. I want that f16 type of aperture where I'm getting a really deep depth of field. But now I know that's also going to let in less light. So that's going to mean higher ISOs, or maybe I'm going to compensate for the higher ISO value with a slower shutter speed. But these are things that you need to start thinking about and understanding so that you can actually use your camera to its full potential. The other thing that you have to understand about aperture is it's affecting my light. So my ISO value, because I'm running at auto ISO, is adjusting itself here. But if I was to take it off from that, let's take it off from that for a second. Let's go to ISO 200 here. Okay, so now it's not going to adjust itself, so I'll let you see how that works. Now if I adjust the aperture, we're going to bring the aperture to f10. You're going to notice it gets darker. And then I'm going to go back to my f4, and you notice that it gets lighter. So now I'm going to go back, grab my ISO, and I'm going to bring it back to auto ISO so it adjusts itself. But it's important that you understand that aperture does affect how much light comes into your lens, which will affect what ISO values you need to use. And it's also going to affect the depth of field or how much of your image is in tack sharp focus. And understanding these things are going to get you well on your way to using your camera in full manual mode and giving you ultimate control over what creative choices you want out of your images. Anyway guys, I hope that you enjoy watching these videos as much as I do making them for you. If you do, go below, subscribe, click that notification bell, and I'll see you on my next video.